All right, so let's get started. I would first like to turn things over to my colleague, Jonathan Church, to introduce things a little bit. I want to remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded and will be made available on the MPO's YouTube page after the meeting. So Jonathan, would you like to introduce us a little bit?
Happy to. Thank you, Sandy. Welcome to this transit working group, everyone, hosted by the Boston Region MPO. And as Sandy said, I'm Jonathan Church. I'm the manager of MPO activities at the Central Transportation staff to the Boston MPO. While there are many familiar faces in the room, I'd like to say a brief hello and welcome to all of you, especially anyone who may be new and doesn't know who I am. While I am speaking, please allow yourself to take a moment to introduce yourselves in the chat. If you could do your name, affiliation if you have one, and whether you or your transit service is located, where it is located. The MPO approves the allocation of all federal transportation dollars in the Boston region, which is made up of 97 cities and towns. The MPO board includes representatives from the MBTA and groups that include and engage other regional transit providers. As staff to the MPO, we provide planning and technical work in support of the region's goals to create a sustainable, healthy, equitable, robust, and economically viable transportation system. If you want to learn more about the MPO, please visit our frequently asked questions page on our website. The link will be put up in the chat. We work with many partners in the region and work to provide forums for convening and discussing crucial transportation topics. We host this particular forum to support coordination between transit providers and to build connections between you all and the MPO. More information about the working group is available on the MPO website again. Again, we'll share the link in the chat. And as always, I'm excited for our discussion today. I'd like to thank our guest speaker, Gracia White, as well as the MPO staff who are contributing to today's meeting. Sandy Johnson, our facilitator for the meeting, will say more about why they are here and the agenda for today. With that, I will turn it over to Sandy.
All right, thank you for the introduction, Jonathan. Stella, if we could advance to the slide about meeting guidelines, please. So again, my name is Sandy Johnston. I'm a senior transportation planner with the staff of the Boston Region MPO, where, among other things, I manage this excellent transit working group. So looking at the chat and the participants list, looks like we have a great mix of folks, and we have representatives from transit agencies, smaller transit operators, municipalities, other sectors. And I appreciate everyone for taking the time to be here today, whether you've attended previous meetings or if this is your first time. So my colleagues, Stella Jordan, Roisin Foley, among others, will be co-hosting the meeting with me. You may have noticed you joined the meeting on mute. You will be able to unmute yourself to ask questions at some point later. If you haven't already, as Jonathan mentioned, please rename yourself with your first and last name, a comma, and then your affiliation. We encourage you to use the chat box to submit questions and comments during the meeting. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function, which you can find either by clicking on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, or a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom, or in the reactions button in the toolbar. We will then call on you during the Q&A sections of the meeting. If you run into any technical difficulties during the meeting, you can send a message through the chat, and one of us will reach out to you. You can also reach Stella at sjordan@ctps.org or 857-702-3675. If you need or want closed captioning, you can turn it on under live captioning. In the control menu at the bottom of the page, you may need to click the three dots that say more. And you'll see many of these instructions and the contact information repeated on other slides. A few other details. In general, we'll be prioritizing comments and questions from transit providers during most portions of this meeting, though we will try to get to everyone as time allows. We do have some time reserved for general public comment toward the end of the meeting. The chat is open, and we'll periodically check for questions and comments there as we go through the different sections of the meeting. You may see links mentioned in the various presentations. We'll drop them in the chat as we're able, and we'll include them all in a post-meeting email. And as I mentioned at the very top, this meeting is being recorded, and the video will be available on the Boston Region MPO YouTube page after the meeting. You can also find recordings of our previous Transit Working Group meetings on that YouTube page. Are there, at this point, any questions? All right, great. So not seeing any. So if we could advance to the agenda slide. I think one more. Yeah. So here's a quick rundown of the agenda, which we also have shown on the slide. First, we'll have a variety of quick updates on MPO-related matters that will be of interest to this group. There will be opportunities for transit providers to bring up what they're working on and think others should know about or what they'd like to know. We'll hear from some of my colleagues on interesting and highly applicable research work that they've recently completed with some time for Q&A. Our keynote speaker, Gresha White, will talk to us about gendered experiences at transit stops and how agencies can help everyone feel safe and included. And finally, there will be some time for general public comments and then some information about how we will be following up after this meeting. You can find a copy of the agenda on the MPO meeting calendar, and I'm also going to put a link in the chat. So now that we're done with the preliminaries, let's just jump right into the updates we have from MPO staff. We have quick updates on several items. First, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Michelle Scott, who put in all of the hard work to develop this group as a pilot, and she's going to give us a brief update on the process of wrapping up the group's pilot status. Michelle, you are muted.
Thanks. Sorry, I took a minute for that request box to come through. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Scott. As you know, I'm a member of MPO staff. And today, I'm going to be just referencing some highlights from a presentation we gave to the MPO board last week about the transit working group, which has been in a pilot phase for a couple years. We've, expecting this to be an ongoing activity for the MPO, but we did take approximately a year or so to, test out how the group might function and what we learned. So I'll be sharing a little bit about that today. There is details in the about some of the material I'll be explaining in a memo that we shared with the MPO. And that's available on our February 3rd MPO meeting calendar page. This will be something that I think a recording will be available through this page in the coming days as well. Next slide, please. So this slide just highlights some of the characteristics of the Transit Working Group as a pilot, as well as some of the questions that we were trying to answer. So as noted here, the proposed mission of the group had two elements. The first was to provide a forum for coordination among transit providers in the Boston region, responding to some feedback that we heard through our LRTP needs assessment process and, other discussion avenues, and also to help inform the MPO's planning and decision-making on matters related to transit. We set up this pilot with a relatively flexible structure where the MPO took on the role of organizing and facilitating the meetings and having a pretty flexible informal participation set up for participants, no formal membership or leadership structure. And we'll talk a little bit about how that's played out in a few minutes. Our desired participants, we tried to cast a pretty wide net for people that were in the transit space, including the variety of providers we have in the region, including RTAs, TMAs, of course, the MBTA, and municipalities and human service organizations that provide transit, as well as advocacy groups, transportation agencies, and members of the public who are involved in the transit space. And in terms of topics, we've touched on both things pertaining to the MPO and specific items of interest to transit providers. Questions we were trying to answer include who will want to participate, what will the benefits be for participants and for the MPO as a whole, and how could this group be structured, and what benefits will we generate based on how we approach that. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned at the board meeting, it's difficult to understate the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on the Transit Working Group. It had a pretty considerable influence on the topics that we discussed, particularly in the beginning as transit agencies were trying to respond to the ridership decreases and other challenges posed by the pandemic. And it of course affected how we could host the meetings in shifting to a virtual format. This chart highlights registrations for transit working group meetings and participation over time. Our first meeting we held in January of 2020 in the State Transportation Building and had healthy in-person attendance. But as you can see from the rest of the chart, that really jumped once we shifted to virtual, which has been an unexpected and really happy development from this group. Next slide, please. As we've discussed at previous meetings, we wanted to have a space in addition to our general working group meetings, which have kind of a presentation and question and answer format for providers to engage more directly than the large virtual meetings seem to be suited for. So we started hosting coffee chats, which are hour-long sessions where MPO staff come with some facilitation questions and participants, talk about, the topic of the day, be that human service transportation or microtransit or, a whole host of other topics. And this slide again highlights some of the participation that we've had in those, with registrations helping us to be able to track interest as in addition to the actual attendance numbers. And while these sessions are typically capped, we have been able to accommodate, the people who have wanted to participate with very few exceptions, which has also been great. Next slide, please. So taking a look at the outcomes of the pilot overall, we've had, over 230 individuals participate in one or more transit working group events, be they general meetings or coffee chats. This slide kind of breaks them down by their affiliation type, whether they're from a certain provider type or transportation agency, a municipality, et cetera. Municipalities, they're the largest category here. They made up about 19% of our overall participation. When we look at the MBTA, RTAs, TMAs, and human service providers together, they made up another 31%. But we do have a breadth of different types of participants here, which enriches our discussions. Next slide, please. We also wanted to track the extent to which we had repeat attendees for some of our events. And that's what's captured on the slide here. We had, of course, over 130 people attend one event over the course of our analysis period, which ranged from January 2020 to early December 2021. But we've also had, people come back for multiple events, which has been really encouraging in terms of the overall success of the group and its likely longevity. Next slide, please. So we've collected feedback in two main ways from the participants in the group. One, of course, is post-event surveys, and you should be getting one for today's meeting, and that focuses on what people liked or disliked about the meeting or suggestions for future ones. We also held a focus group with transit providers and some organizations who we talked to prior to setting up the pilot when we were getting things going back in 2019. And we kind of synthesized this material, which is discussed in a lot of detail, particularly in the appendices of the memo that I posted the link to. But this slide just captures some general highlights of the things that we heard. We appreciate knowing that people have found the transit working group topics to be interesting and informative. We're really glad to know that people have liked the coffee chats and the additional opportunities that's offered for coordination and connection and discussion. And we also appreciate knowing that this has been a helpful way for transit providers to get information about the MPO, in ways that are more directly tailored to their interests. One thing we did here, and I'll talk a little bit about this before I close the presentation, is that people are finding that they're still hungry for certain types of coordination, and that there's more different types of things we could do. In particular, people are interested in seeing what actions we can take, transit providers, can take together to address shared issues and needs. Some examples that people brought up were mapping the different services of the region and using that as a basis for understanding where there are gaps or maybe ways to increase efficiency, or if there's a way that agencies can collaborate on things like customer information, translation, or providing better GTFS feeds that capture transit schedules. Finally, one other major point people brought up was appreciating this group as a venue to engage with the MBTA on how best to coordinate services and looking at ways to sustain and improve upon that as the group goes forward. And again, we really appreciate, the MBTA, who's been a big player in both presenting at these general meetings as well as engaging providers in the region through the coffee chats and discussions happening there. Next slide, please. So just some additional impressions that we have as staff about the group. The information, ideas, challenges, needs that you've been sharing with us have done a lot and will be doing a lot to inform the planning and investment work that we do as an MPO. We appreciate the opportunities to strengthen our relationships with people working at transit agencies through the development of this group. We're glad to be able to share products and applications and things that we're developing as staff to this audience. We've gotten a lot out of the flexible structure. We really appreciate the diversity of people who've been able to participate and hope that this structure is allowing folks to participate at the level that feels right for them, whether it's coming to the occasional meeting or coming to meetings and coffee chats on an ongoing basis. And finally, we definitely are picking up on the interest of people in really addressing provider-to-provider coordination and shared issues. But if you have thoughts or ideas about how this group could relate to the MPO and want to share those with Sandy, definitely do that. Next slide, please. So just looking to the future, we're MPO staff now under Sandy's leadership for the Transit Working Group are looking to continue its general structure and meeting schedule through the end of this federal fiscal year, which ends in September. We're going to be using a lot of the feedback we hear through meetings like these and through the coffee chats to inform the development of our next long-range plan, the Coordinated Human Services Transportation Plan that's coming up, and other MPO work. And we'll also be taking up that question of how we can do more action-oriented work through the Transit Working Group. There are, challenges, and limitations that we have to think about, both in terms of how we can resource things and how to most effectively play a role given the type of agency we are as an MPO, and knowing that implementation of some of the things that may come out of the group would depend on other agencies and actors. But these are all things that we're taking as food for thought as we're pursuing and working on some of these suggestions. And so that's just a quick highlight of some of the information from that presentation last week, and I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, not seeing any questions, and I think we do need to move on. So thank you, Michelle, for that. But please do feel free to reach out to Michelle or to myself, especially to me, with any questions at sjohnston@ctps.org. So our next two presentations, brief presentations, are actually from new members of MPO staff, who I'm excited to introduce to everybody. So first, we're going to hear from Rose McCarran about the Regional Transit Service Planning Technical Support Program.
Thanks, Sandy. I'm Rose McCarran. I recently joined the MPO with the Transit Analysis and Planning team. If we could go to the next slide. I just wanted to let you all know about the Regional Transit Service Planning Technical Support Program. Through this program, the MPO offers support for transit planning, including route planning, ridership, cost effectiveness, and any other transit service characteristics. The people who are eligible to receive this assistance from the MPO are regional transit authorities, TMAs, municipalities, and the MAPC subregions. I will highlight that the services that are eligible for this support are services that are available to the public. And if you'd like more information on the program or would like to apply, you can see the link below. And it was just put in the chat. Thank you, Sandy. And yeah, we look forward to hearing your needs and supporting your agencies. Thank you.
All right, and thank you, Rose. And again, feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any questions about that. So next, I would like to introduce my new colleague, Srilekha Murthy, who is succeeding me as the manager for the Unified Planning Work Program, or UPWP. And she's going to tell you a little bit about herself and about that program.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Srilekha Murthy, and like Sandy said, I am the new manager of the Unified Planning Work Program, taking over from the highly capable Sandy Johnston. The UPWP is, in general, a policy document which programs federal funding for planning and analysis projects across the Boston region. Funded projects include core MPO programs known as certification requirements, discrete studies, meaning those that are selected annually and are renewed annually as well, technical assistance offerings, and ongoing program support budgets. Next slide. Thanks. So we're at the beginning of the process here in February, where we're soliciting study ideas that could potentially be funded in the next year. So we want to hear from you. If you have a study idea that you'd like to see funded, please fill out the survey. I think we're going to drop the link in the chat. You can also email me. I will also put my email in the chat, and please reach out with a proposal, what you'd like to see studied, and we can go from there. Maybe your project will be selected. All right. Like I said, please feel free to reach out to me, but thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Srilekha. All right, so then I am going to talk very briefly about the travel demand management study that we are undertaking as staff at the NPO right now. So if we could go to the next slide. So over the course of several years, we've received feedback that there's interest from our regional stakeholders in the NPO taking on more of a role in travel demand management, which is the suite of kind of non-construction projects and policies and incentives that policymakers and other entities can undertake to support non-car travel or non-single occupancy vehicle travel. And last fiscal year 2021, we hosted a pair of very informative and successful digital forums on travel demand management. And the NPO decided to fund a brief follow-up study during this fiscal year to decide should the NPO be involved in TDM, and if so, how. And I am the project manager for that study. I'm going to throw a link to the scope in the chat in case anyone's interested. And if we could go to the next slide, please. So there are three major tasks involved in this study. The first is to survey and interview staff at other NPOs to document how they engage with TDM practice. The second is to survey and interview regional stakeholders, that's you, to document the level of and specifics of interest in NPO involvement in TDM. And we're doing that in several ways. So first, there's a survey. This is going to be a very survey-intensive day. I apologize, which I'm going to put the link into in the chat. And you can fill that out anytime between now and the end of February. We'll also be hosting a coffee chat through this same transit working group, and that is coming up next Wednesday, a week from today. And I'm going to put the link to the registration page for that in the chat. And finally, we're going to be doing some interviews with folks around the region, and we intend to host a open house style event at some point in the future. Then finally, we'll come back, bring all that information back, and make some recommendations to the NPO so that they can make a decision about if and when and how the NPO should be involved in travel demand management. So we're running just a tad bit behind schedule, so I'm going to refer questions again to me later by email and reach out if you have any. You'll also hear more about future coffee chats at the end of the meeting. So at this point, I would like to open the floor up to any transit providers who would like to share anything. We've created this space on the agenda for transit providers, other transportation agencies to make any announcements you'd like to share with the group beyond the main topic of today's meeting. If you have anything you want to talk about, ask about, information you'd like to share, please raise your hand and we'll call on you, or you can put it in the chat. All right, I see a hand. Alistair, go ahead.
Seem to have trouble coming off mute. Sorry, everybody. Very quickly, it was briefly mentioned earlier as something we touched on last year, which was how to communicate across T-systems information about services that we touch on or connect to. So that work is underway. I'm not sure I can actually share it right now because I don't know if I've got share privileges, but we have a draft mock-up of some onboard maps that we're starting to generate. And one of the aspects we're looking at the moment is putting QR codes on to link at each station, or finding a method of doing this anyway, so that we could link to websites for all of the relative services. Because I think we're a little conscious, as we discussed before, that schedules change a lot. So if it's anything that's kind of static that we're putting on our rolling stock, we'd have to update it very frequently. And I think this is a dynamic solution. And then at the back end, we'd do the same on the on our website, obviously, and that's what we'd link to. So some of you will probably be getting outreach from Keyless, actually. So we're kind of integrating and coordinating that through them. So that's just a heads up.
All right, thank you, Alistair. And for those who were not able to be here, Alistair and his team with MBTA Rail Transformation did a great presentation last spring on their program. And also we've done a coffee chat with them in last fall, and looking forward to doing another one. So perhaps we'll end up bringing you back to talk a little bit more about the interactive signage and information program. Anyone else? Susan, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. So just a couple things. So there's a number of folks have been asking around here for a way for the MBTA and the LRTA to meet up, or some other service that will better serve the Bedford VA Hospital and also the Middlesex Community College. So I'm hoping, I'm only mentioning this because I think we have someone from the MBTA here, and I see an LRTA board member, and of course, many transit experts. So something we'd like to look at. People have been asking for years. So hopefully we'll have a meeting soon with all of those entities to see if there's something we can figure out. And then the other thing is, I don't really see folks kind of from our general area, but we are still plugging away at a regionalization action plan, hoping to find a way to better coordinate services. And if anyone wants information on that, please reach out. Thanks so much.
I will say Susan's regionalization plan is very exciting, and we're hopeful we'll feature some of that here in the future as well. So, all right. Thank you. Anyone else? Excellent. All right, so we're going to move on. Now I'd like to introduce a couple of my colleagues to talk about some of the work that we've recently finished that's relevant to much of the work that you all here do. There will be an opportunity for Q&A after each presentation. So first, I'd like to introduce Betsy Harvey, our Transportation Equity Manager, to talk about the Access to Commercial Business Districts Phase 2 study.
Thank you very much, Sandy. And I'm really excited to be here to talk to all of you about this guidebook that myself and several colleagues have just wrapped up, called Transportation Recovery Guidebook for Commercial Business Districts, or CBDs. The goal of the study was to develop a pandemic recovery guidebook for municipalities for transportation access to and within commercial business districts in our region. And one of the exciting things about this guidebook is that in addition to looking at transportation, it also looks at the role of other areas in as that pertains to recovery from the pandemic, including public health, of course, housing, real estate, and the economy. And so the intention is that the recommendations in the guidebook will not only help CBDs recover from the pandemic, although of course that is critical, but also help them build back in a way that will leave them more economically vibrant, equitable, and resilient for the future. So to help us understand how COVID-19 has affected CBDs in the region, as well as strategies that they've employed to support continued access to CBDs during the pandemic, we put together some case studies of 12 CBDs in 11 municipalities. 2 of those CBDs were in Boston. And to select those CBDs, we classified them based on their level of public transit access, picking 2 CBDs within each type of access, which ranged from lots of transit access with rapid transit down to just commuter rail or no transit access at all. We also aimed to have geographic and economic diversity and a range of municipality sizes, and sought out several municipalities that had a significant environmental justice population. So I want to talk a little bit about what we've heard from some of the interviewees that relate specifically to public transit. And I'll just state as for some context that the interviews took place this past summer. So keep that in mind when thinking about some of these different, the input that we received, because obviously things have evolved a bit since then. So some of the things we heard around challenges was the fact that commuter rail ridership and the drop-in ridership has affected had this waterfall effect of affecting transit ridership on shuttles that connect to stations. Folks also said that CBDs with higher shares of people who work remotely saw more disruption to their transit ridership, while places with more essential workers saw somewhat less of a disruption. And we saw that in the ridership on bus lines and some of the rapid transit lines versus the commuter rail lines, which was a lot less. Another big challenge was making sure that there were enough safe spaces for riders who must use transit, i.e. essential workers. And that was really critical in places where demand for transit still really remained. And so a lot of the investment and focus was on making sure that those riders continue to have safe access to transit. And there's also a lot of uncertainty about the future of downtowns and corporate office space and the ridership of transit that serves those spaces. We also asked interviewees what some of their goals were around transit, kind of in the midst of the pandemic, but also kind of in the longer term coming out of the pandemic. What did they want to continue in terms of any positive trends that had occurred, and what did they want to mitigate in terms of trends that they didn't want to keep seeing? One of those goals was to improve biking and walking connections to train stations. And that was eyed as kind of a something that could help, could help places where local congestion has really increased, and also where people, to give people access to the outdoors in a way that would help mitigate COVID-19. We also heard that folks wanted to accelerate planned investments using newly available federal and state money. Of course, again, this was back in the summer, and so there's been a lot of new money even since then, of course, through the bipartisan infrastructure law. And so that will continue to be, I'm sure, a goal of many municipalities. We also heard that folks wanted to ensure that public transit access remains to outdoor destinations that have become increasingly popular since the pandemic. And we have found that congestion on weekends has really increased a lot during the pandemic, and maintaining, even expanding services to outdoor recreation could help relieve congestion and increase access to outdoor spaces that are so critical to our mental and physical health. So this input and some of others that we heard from our interviews, we used that as well as a review of research about the pandemic to help us go through a process called exploratory scenario planning, or XSP. And that really helped us develop recommendations that are in the guidebook. And we turned to XSP because of this really unique situation that we find ourselves in. How do you write a recovery guidebook for a pandemic that is continuously evolving and that is enmeshed in all areas of our lives, in which we really didn't have a kind of a playbook for this before 2020. And we also wanted to create a guidebook that could adapt to whatever the future of the pandemic was and reflect the varying challenges that municipalities face throughout the region. And we wanted it to also be proactive to help folks recover in a way that would allow them to build back stronger. And so the XSP framework is specifically designed to support decision-making, where there is a significant amount of uncertainty and where there are multiple interconnected forces at play, both of which are the case in the pandemic. This flowchart on the screen shows the 6 steps that we went through. I'm not going to go into detail on them. If you want to know more about them, you can read the guidebook. But I want to talk a little bit more about steps 2 and 3, which are at the heart of XSP. And those are the driving forces that will have the biggest impact on CBD recovery, and then which in turn shape the scenarios that we develop at the end of the XSP process. And I'll also talk a little bit about the recommendations that do address those driving forces. So driving forces are those forces, and that can be technological, societal, environmental, political, or economic, that will affect how well and how quickly CBDs recover from the pandemic. And how those forces affect CBDs, of course, are more certain than others. And so certainties, we talk about certainties as those things that we are pretty confident will happen. And they're common to all futures, whereas uncertainties, exactly what they sound like, those are things that will lead to divergent futures depending on their direction and magnitude, and we're not sure right now how they will play out. And so to select those driving forces, we drew on what we heard from interviews and research that's been done on the future of transportation and CBDs. For public health related driving forces, we know that there's a high vaccination rate in Massachusetts, but we also don't really know how long the pandemic will play out and the severity of it as we go forward. Under transportation-related forces, we know that MBTA is focusing more on transit-critical populations. We also know that there's been a big increase in the desire for active transportation and outdoor recreation access, but we don't know how changes to mode share will play out. We know that in some municipalities, transit mode share has been more stable, and some of that is a function of the reliance of some residents on public transit, while in other towns, they may have had more of a choice in terms of their transportation resources. And so that's reflected in the dramatic drop in transit ridership in some stations since March 2020. As for economic related forces, we know that we have persistent socioeconomic and racial inequities. Of course, we hope that isn't a permanent trend, but we know that there continues to be significant disparities among different demographic groups, especially for people of color, which have been exacerbated by the pandemic. We also see a continued rise for e-commerce and holds a larger and larger share of retail sales. We don't know how consumer shopping preferences and the long-term impacts to store business models will play out, especially for those towns that rely on foot traffic downtown. And that might be those of commuters who might go shopping during the day or go and get coffee, or that could be also of tourists who might go on the weekends. We don't know how that will evolve. And so, similarly, we don't know how employer remote work policies will shake out. Some places haven't yet finalized their policies, and so that will affect many other factors, including our final category, which is where people choose to live. We don't know how remote work will change the demand for housing, particularly for those who have jobs who allow them to work from home at least some of the time. And we also don't know how that will affect the demand for office space in traditional office locales such as Boston or Quincy or Framingham. And so there are a lot of things we don't know. But we were able to use those driving forces to come up with distinct scenarios to thinking about how the future could play out depending on how those uncertainties unfold. You can read more about those scenarios in the guidebook, which I encourage you to do so. But I will skip right now more to the recommendation part and talk a little bit more about the transit-oriented recommendations that we came up with. The key to these recommendations is that they are no or low regret solutions. And what that means is that they're not these big pie in the sky ideas, but they're things that can help under a variety of different circumstances, no matter how the future plays out, to ensure that municipalities remain resilient and sustainable and equitable in the face of an unknown future. So the table lists some strategies and actions that we came up with and shows how they would relate to the driving force. A gray circle means that the recommendation would likely provide negligent support or adaptation to this driving force, and the green triangle means that the recommendation could support adaptation or shape the direction of that driving force. And so that can give you a sense of which recommendations could address certain driving forces and might be most appropriate for you to invest in as a municipality or an RTA or other transit provider. So I want to talk a little bit, just to wrap up, of the sort of recommendations that we provided. Again, I encourage you to go read through all of them. Just this will give you a bit of a taste of how we went about writing about them. We organized them into two categories: systematic and infrastructural and programmatic. Systematic recommendations are things that are kind of things that are woven through all of your work, such as public outreach, or kind of how you work with other agencies or other departments, while infrastructural and programmatic are more one-off investments on particular infrastructure or a particular program that you're investing in. And so the way that we formatted these recommendations, we have a short description of why these things are important. And then also we refer to certain case studies that we include in the guidebook. And then we include an approximate implementation timeframe and some resources for you for further reading and some funding opportunities as well. And I should note that the funding opportunities are current as of August 2021. Obviously, a lot has evolved since then, so they do not include the current bipartisan infrastructure law funding opportunities. So I encourage you to look at those outside of the guidebook. So among the recommendations we included are things like collaborating with other municipalities. More and more, that is an important thing to do when you're applying for a grant, whether it's for the MPO or for other state grants or federal grants. And that was a very successful strategy for a lot of people that we talked to in our interviews. Oops. We also talk a little bit about recommending developing a curb management plan, which is a bit of a teaser for the next presentation. My colleague will talk specifically about developing a curb management plan. But that can be a great policy for thinking about how to divide up your space on your road for different types of uses, including public transit uses. Among the infrastructural and programmatic recommendations we include, we have investing in public transit infrastructure that supports service for essential workers. And that can mean anything from actual transit routes all the way to bus stop amenities like bus shelters and the like, so that you're providing the people who need transit the most with the best amenities that they can have. And then also mitigating loss of transit ridership potentially. We also have in there supporting the implementation of regional rail system. And what I mean by that is not thinking just about how can we get people in and out of Boston and the inner core during the morning and evening weekday peak hours, but how can we think more about providing true mobility across all areas of people's needs throughout the region. And that's obviously potentially a big lift and a lot of work to do as a region, but it's something that is increasingly important as we move away from thinking about transportation as just serving peak job commuting. And that wraps up my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions or comments, and thank you.
Not seeing any questions or comments or raised hands at the moment, but Betsy, if you can put your email in the chat. And oh, Susan is asking for a link to the draft, which I'm sure we can provide. And Betsy, you can put your email in the chat and folks can reach out to you offline.
Great, thank you. Happy to answer any questions later. And I will put a link in the chat.
Thank you, Betsy. All right. So I would like to next introduce Blake Acton, who's a transportation planner and analyst with our transit analysis and planning group. And he's going to talk about another exciting recent study, managing curb space in the Boston region, a guidebook that we put together. So go ahead, Blake.
Okay. All right, just to start, I'm going to go ahead and paste the link to our document in the chat before I forget. So, all right, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Blake, as Sandy introduced, and I am presenting the results of the Future of the Curb Phase 2 study, where we created a curb management guidebook for planners in our region. So with our guidebook, we aim to introduce and establish the practice of curb management by examining case studies, best practices, and challenges facing our region. But more importantly, we aspire to provide planners with realistic practical strategies that they can use to more effectively manage curb space in their municipality. We put together a pretty detailed and comprehensive document, and we simply don't have the time to cover the entire guidebook in this short presentation. So I will briefly define some terms and summarize our interview findings, and then outline our 3 foundations of curb management before finally discussing a few scenarios of how planners could apply some of our strategies described in the guidebook to specific scenarios. All right, so definitions. What is curb space? What is this about? So curb space can be defined as roughly the area between a street curb and the roadway, typically inhabited by parking. This is an increasingly valuable space in the city, especially in more dense urban areas where it could be used as a travel lane or for parking or deliveries, outdoor dining, or as a dedicated lanes for bikes or buses. Curb management seeks to find which of these uses most effectively serves the needs of the community. Ideally, we aim to treat the space as a blank slate and reframe curb space away from the default tradition that parking is the default, right, and everything else is an alternative. However, in many cases, this approach isn't realistic since parking dominates most curb space in cities today. So for curb management strategies to be useful, they need to acknowledge this reality. So to create our guidebook, we interviewed a total of 27 different professionals, comprised mostly of municipal transportation planners. And from our interviews, we learned that curb management is a new practice to most planners, and that today curbs are managed in a largely reactive and ad hoc fashion. We also found a strong desire for more practical strategies and ideas to manage their curbs. So to start, our first foundation of curb management in the guidebook is to build a community coalition of allies that can help develop and accomplish curb management goals. This is important because curb space is so valuable with many different competing needs and priorities, and planners have little power on their own to change the curb. By establishing committees and maintaining outreach, planners can identify issues, collect feedback, and promote projects and goals. We advise that planners develop a trusting relationship with local elected officials that can champion curb management efforts. Many curb management projects can be attractive to elected officials since they are small scale, affordable, but highly visible, allowing elected officials to impact their communities within a short election cycle. So our second foundation is to develop a curb priority matrix that prioritizes the different curb uses within each land use according to the goals of the community. In this example priority matrix, land uses are along the top in the gray boxes. And hold on, and curb uses are represented within each cell. Within each land use column, the more suitable curb uses are ranked near the top. For example, in this matrix, the neighborhood commercial district puts the highest priority curb use as activation of public space. This means that providing sufficient outdoor dining and parklet space in the neighborhood has the highest priority. It's important to note that the matrix shown here is merely an example of what one could look like. Each community's priority matrix will look different depending on the unique land uses and neighborhoods in the community. As municipalities develop their curb management plans, their matrix may evolve over time, and land uses may become more specific, and eventually they could be accompanied by a map detailing the extent of each land use. So our final foundation is to create a curb inventory. This should be a searchable database with curb regulations by location and by time. Municipalities need to choose between in-house or vendor options to develop their curb databases. Each option has its advantages and disadvantages, with in-house options offering more control, while vendor options allow for faster data collection and off-the-shelf analysis tools. Regardless, whichever option your municipality chooses, it's important that the database needs to be capable of answering simple questions, such as how many parking spaces are available on this block at 5 p.m., for example. Curbs change frequently, so ideally the database should be able to be updated on an ongoing basis in the field. So now that we've established 3 foundations of curb management, let's walk through a few scenarios of how planners could use the guidebook to address some specific curb management issues. And we begin our scenarios with a parking study. We recommend that planners frequently begin with a comprehensive survey of parking utilization and turnover of both on and off-street parking near their area of interest. Parking studies assist with many aspects of the curb management process. Planners can learn if, when, and where there is too much parking, where and when to focus price interventions, but most importantly, they can be used to find opportunities to replace underutilized parking with new curb uses. And finally, they can help planners defend projects and proposals against what I refer to as the first law of curb management, that there is a continuous and pervasive perception that there is never enough parking. So after we complete a parking study, we're presented with 2 somewhat simplified primary outcomes that can help us decide what to do next. If we find occupancy is greater than about 90% along that block, well, we may decide to increase prices, which decreases demand by encouraging shorter parking durations and shifting demand to alternative parking options and modes of travel. Alternatively, we can increase supply, which has largely been the default option in most American cities for decades. However, as we have increasingly learned over the long term, this is an expensive trap that encourages more car dependency, which feeds a vicious cycle that increases parking demand. On the other hand, if we find occupancy is less than 90%, which is often the case, then that presents us with an opportunity to repurpose the underutilized curb space with something else that better serves the needs of the community. So let's walk through a few hypothetical scenarios that show how a planner could respond to different outcomes from parking study. Oh, that's right. So if we, this is our decreasing supply, and we can replace parking with different curb space opportunities. So there we go. All right, so in our first scenario, we find a less than 90% parking utilization. So we decide to replace some curb parking with a higher priority curb use. In this land use type, in the gray box at the top there, is described as neighborhood commercial. And our top curb priority is listed as activation of public space in the orange box. And in our hypothetical municipality, perhaps this land use type could be described as an area that has favorable conditions for outdoor dining with low traffic volumes and speeds, street trees, narrow streets, and the local establishments are visited mostly by nearby residents, and many of whom access the area by walking or biking or by transit. And as a result, we decide to replace some of our parking spaces with parklets and outdoor dining installations. So in our second scenario, we have the same result from our parking study, where we find an overall lower parking utilization. Just like before, we decide to replace parking with some other different higher priority curb use. And in this land use type, described as a neighborhood connector, we have our highest priority is to move people and goods. So perhaps this area is describes a congested high traffic corridor with lots of transit ridership. And so in this scenario, we decide to replace curbside parking with a dedicated bus lane. And in this case, that's because it is the most efficient way to move the most number of people through the corridor. But however, unlike in the previous scenario, we may need to replace multiple blocks of parking along a linear corridor as opposed to just a few spaces, which might experience more pushback than in the first scenario. So for a situation like this, what do we recommend? So one strategy we recommend for this is that we recommend proposing a quick build. And a quick build is simply a low cost, fast, small scale, temporary project that demonstrates a new curb use without the risk of committing to a permanent change. In our case, we could build a bus lane with simple traffic cones and signs. We could experiment with a bus lane while shortcutting the lengthy approval process, since we're not building a permanent project. If the temporary bus lane doesn't work out, the cones can simply be removed. A critical component to a successful quick build is to include a plan to evaluate the impact of the project and collect feedback from the community. This data informs the next action. Should the project be removed, or should it be moved somewhere else? Should it be adjusted? Or perhaps the intervention, if it is well received, could be replaced with something more permanent. So in our last scenario, we have the opposite outcome as the first two, where we find high parking utilization. So we don't have a lot of available spaces. And so we might have lots of cruising, as it's called, where we have cars hunting for spaces, creating more congestion in traffic, and perhaps stopping lanes by double parking, et cetera, et cetera. And so in this scenario, one approach is to increase the price, which if you increase the price of parking, which could also be by decreasing timers. So you could also just have time limits as well. That's essentially the same as increasing the price. And if you do this to enough amount, then you would decrease demand for parking, and then eventually you would reach a less than 90%, just like in the first two scenarios, ideally. And then once again, you can do the same thing and replace some of that parking with some other higher priority curb use, just like in our previous two scenarios. So in this highly simplified graphic, the linchpin of this and the most difficult thing to accomplish is the increasing price. So in this third scenario, we're referring to a downtown business district, or like a CBD, as like in our previous presentation. So what do we recommend for dealing with this scenario? So our strategies for introducing prices in a downtown business district, we recommend that planners approach business owners early in the process so they can introduce the idea and attempt to address any concerns they may have. This can involve surveys and mailers, but the most effective method is to visit them in person. This demonstrates respect and helps develop a rapport. It also gives the planner a chance to set a constructive and civil tone before the business owner potentially develops their own perceptions from the news or social media or from rumor. After setting the tone, we recommend that planners emphasize the benefits of increased parking turnover. Our parking study in this scenario shows low available supply. So visitors will avoid the area since they can't find parking, and drivers will generate more traffic as they search for an open space. Introducing metered parking increases vehicle turnover by incentivizing visitors to leave within a more reasonable time frame, leaving more spots open for more visitors. The result is more customers per hour for businesses. Finally, we recommend that planners consider introducing prices with a parking benefit district, or a PBD. With a PBD, local parking revenue is reinvested back into the district. It's managed by a committee comprised of local stakeholders who can adjust prices and recommend projects for the local revenue. District income can be reinvested into improvements such as crosswalks, lighting, street trees, or perhaps improvements for bus stops and amenities for, transit stations and things like that. Those enhance the attractiveness of the district, which draws in more visitors, creating a virtuous cycle that leads to more parking revenue and ultimately more customers for local businesses. All right, so we're finished talking about the guidebook itself. So this guidebook was the product of the Future the Curb Phase 2 study, and it's a follow-up to a Phase 1 study from a few years ago that looked more at nationwide strategies for curb management. And then in this project, we tried to formalize those strategies into recommendations for our region. And in the next study, which we are working on right now, we're just starting, is that we aim to develop methodologies to help planners evaluate their own curb management strategies. So this is pretty broad, but we want to come up with more detailed recommendations for how a planner might go about measuring whether or not a curb intervention was successful, and where to put what, as kind of put it very broadly. So we're interested in any recommendations or ideas anyone may have of a project that will affect the curb in some way. It could be a bus lane, bike lane, it could be something related to parking, anything like that. And we're interested in sort of looking at a before and after analysis to see sort of its impact and kind of collect some data and do a case study. So we're definitely open to that. If you have an idea later, feel free to email me. I will put my email in the chat box. And so thank you for your time. I welcome any questions or feedback.
Thank you, Blake. All right, I don't see any questions. I saw a question from Frida in the chat, and I just want to acknowledge that, and we'll get to it in a few minutes. Oh, Alistair, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the unmute override was on. So very quickly, just interested in specifically station drop-off. Some of those we obviously manage ourselves, but some of those are city-based and some of those are town-based and some of those are town centre. So I just would like to say that's one of the things we're studying where it's our own property, but so we could probably coordinate on that side, and then separately where it's town-based, we'd quite like to coordinate too, obviously. So it is an issue we're aware of, and it's kind of obviously for us different than every station. So makes it hard to generalize, but it would be nice to coordinate on that.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we would definitely be interested.
All right. And Frida, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name. Frida, you should be able to unmute.
All right, there I go. Anyways, I wanted to say that I partially got an answer to my question that I had asked in the chat, so I wouldn't worry about it right now.
Yeah, so you had asked about plans for bikes on the Green Line, and also about expanding, I think, the ride service or paratransit service into towns where the commuter rail goes.
Yeah.
So I don't know anything about any plans for expanding bikes on the Green Line, although I believe that the MBTA will be using some of its infrastructure bill money to buy a new Green Line fleet, which should be all low floor and would theoretically be easier to allow bikes on, but don't quote me on that. I don't know what the plans are in particular. And that would be several years down the line. In terms of the paratransit conversation, that's something that we talk about a lot here. And actually, we're going to be hosting a coffee chat on human services transportation, which includes paratransit, that I'll link to and talk about at the end of the meeting. We're very aware that there are areas on the fringe of the Boston region where paratransit services kind of collide, and one town may have service from a different provider, and it can be very hard to cross those barriers, even within the kind of sphere of the MBTA service area. If you include commuter rail. So I don't have a solid answer for that, I'm afraid, but you know, we are providing opportunities to discuss it, and it's something this group is interested in.
Yeah, I'm not worrying about it. Like I said, you know, it was partially answered in the chat. I brought it up because I can't see my great-grandnephew who lives in Gloucester, and I also work as a SESP for an autistic child in Southborough, and it's hard, you know. I spend like 4 hours traveling to see the child in Southborough, and then 4 hours in order to get back into Boston to get home and do whatever else I have to do. So I figured I'd just bring it up and see if there were any changes that were going to be made at some point.
No, thank you, Frida, for sharing that. I would definitely, you know, I will be sure to make sure that we invite you to the next coffee chat on this topic. I think that's something that some people there might be able to share more information than we have available right now. Any further questions for Blake? All right, well, in that case, you know how to follow up with him if you have any others. And thank you, Blake. Great presentation. Alicia?
Oh, hi, sorry about that. Alicia Hunt from the city of Medford. I have to say that actually prompted a question. I am the city's planner and I'm on our traffic commission. And an interesting thing has come up with curb management recently related to paratransport and senior transport, where residents have been requesting handicapped parking spot to be able to be picked up by trail over in their neighborhood or close to their homes. And we have been hesitant to use the designation of handicapped parking for that. And I've been talking about pickup, drop-off, or loading zones. And I'd be very interested, if not today, in the future, if other communities have a solution for this or a recommendation. Our traffic commission would like to find sort of a standard answer that makes sense, because we're not convinced it's an appropriate use of a handicapped parking spot, particularly when the resident has a driveway and or has no intention of having a vehicle with a handicap placard.
What an interesting question.
We had three requests last month for these in Medford.
All right. Yeah, I don't necessarily have anything I can, say to address that off the top of my head. Blake, I imagine that's something maybe you can consider in the next phase of the study.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking for ideas to do case studies. So if you have like a specific place in mind where there's something going on related to this, where we could go and do some kind of analysis or study, collect data, and try to answer your question, that would be a good candidate.
Right, we'd be happy to be in touch either with myself or Todd Blake here in Medford. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Alicia. All right, so I think we need to move on to our keynote presentation. I would like to introduce Gresha White. It's my distinct pleasure to have her here. Gresha is interested in using data and media to improve the delivery of government services in order to better serve the needs of all citizens and to foster trust and engagement. Last August, she completed her master's degree in urban informatics from Northeastern. She currently serves on the board of Planners of Color, the National Coalition for Latinx with Disabilities, and is vice chair of the Latinos in Planning Division of the American Planning Association. She's very busy. Her documentary on women who bike at night will be released at the end of this month. That sounds exciting. And Gresha is going to talk with us about her master's research on gendered experiences at bus stops and some takeaways that hopefully you all can put into action in your planning.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sandy. Thank you, everybody, for having me. I really enjoyed listening to everybody's presentations. And as I was listening, I just saw like so many ways that everything that y'all are working on could apply to like, you know, improving access for women and like various genders as they use transit in the Boston region. So thank you again. And yeah, I'll be talking about bus stops, amenities, and perceived safety through a gender lens. Hold on, I think, can I control this? Okay, yeah. So yeah, my name is Gresha White, and that's my Twitter, where I am sometimes a bit too active, but yeah. And yeah, as Sandy said, I completed this research as part of my project, like final project at Northeastern, and I was very lucky to have it be funded by the Congress for New Urbanism New England chapter as part of their Spatial Justice Fellows Program, which I believe they're having again this year. So if you're interested in something like that, definitely keep an eye out on their website. And yeah, so I'll be talking about the overview of the project, what I did, the results I got, and then I'm also going to include a section on best practices and recommendations, particularly focusing in Los Angeles, and then of course Q&A and feedback. Okay, so the overview, this was a very hyper-focused project. I only focused on one bus lane, and it was on Route 1, which goes from Nubian Square in Roxbury and then over to the Harvard campus in Cambridge. And the goal was to find, you know, like whether or not gender plays a role in how safe people feel waiting at the bus stop during the day and then also during the night. So what differences there are there, and you know how much that's influenced by what amenities are there as well. So yeah, I split the project into two parts. The first one was doing what I call a bus safety audit. I use the word audit because I like that better than survey, but ultimately it was a survey that I did through text. And then the second part was looking at PADI data. So this was the Plan for Accessible Transit Infrastructure, another survey that the MBTA did. So the first part, I used a platform called Slick Text. I found it very easy to use, and they had really good customer service. So I really enjoyed working with them. And then I created essentially these posters, and I just used like a free website called Canva to design them. This was a template that I just tweaked, and I was very intentional about using something that was fun. These colors, I really like the colors. I wanted to make it attractive, and yeah, I just put the bus stop ID number and then instructions on how to participate. It was available in 4 different languages, but of course, I would include, I translated it using Google, but I would advise to maybe use partner with a person who actually speaks the language in the future. But because the survey was so short, I just did a Google Translate. And yeah, I used my grocery cart to transport them. These things are so massive. They were heavy because they were weatherproof. So I could only carry a few at a time. So just hanging them up at the bus stops was a huge undertaking in itself. And this is what they look like at the stop. Yeah, they're pretty large. So I was also, that was also on purpose. I wanted, to catch people's eyes. And I ended up hanging them up at 33 out of the 46 bus stops along the route. Ideally, I would have done them at all of them, but again, there were limitations because like at some, there were a couple, like if you're familiar with the area and you think about Central Square, the stops that are there, there's always people there. And honestly, I didn't feel comfortable posting them there, not because I didn't feel safe, but because the people that were waiting, or like the people that were there often maybe don't have any other place to go. So if you're familiar with the area, perhaps you'll get what I'm getting at. Yeah, so I just left those alone. And then, yeah, anyway, so that's that. So this is kind of what the tech survey looked like. I explained what it was about, and then do you identify as a woman? And it was just like a yes or no question. In the future, it would be great to include like more options, but I didn't want to make it too long because it is a tech survey. And then how safe do you feel when the sun is out? And then what about when it's nighttime? And then how many minutes do you think that you wait for the bus? And actually, I didn't make use of this data because the other part just ended up taking so much more time and effort than I thought. But I do have that data. So if anybody would want it, I'm happy to give it to you. And the second part was, the PADI data set. So this is kind of what is available, or was available at the time when I looked it up. It's, you can go through all of the stops that the MBTA has, and you click on it, and then there's this pop-up that shows up, and at the end, you can access the PDF with all the data. But it's a PDF, so it's not very user-friendly when you're trying to like make sense of it and pull the numbers. So I reached out to them, and I just wanted to give a huge shout out to Joaquin because he was so helpful, and he I reached out to him, and like he was so supportive, and he gave me access to an Excel sheet, which is more usable, of course. So very thankful for him, and then. So now to visualizing it. So this is how I chose to show the amenities. I used like little icons that I thought were fun and very easy to understand. So yeah, this is what it looks like. And this is part of like an interactive map. I'll share a link at the end where you can, explore it for yourself. And there's different filters. You can filter like just southbound bus stops or just northbound. So yeah. And okay, so now to kind of like the responses that I got. Okay, so on the left side, we have in blue, you can see all of the bus stops where I hung up the posters. And this is just for the southbound direction. And the yellow shows where I actually received bus stops from. And then the red is where there's GTFS data for them available, and that's something that I looked up whenever I was trying to maybe do something like with the minutes, like the data about the minutes, about how many minutes people think that they're waiting, but I ended up not doing anything with that, but I just wanted to show that. Okay, then on the right side, it's broken down a bit more. In green, we have the respondents who's identified as a woman, and then in blue, we have those who don't. And then in dark green is people who prefer not to answer that question. And here's the same exact thing, but in the northbound direction. And then here you can see like we have a lot more of the responses on the, like in Boston, which like at the bottom, in the Roxbury area, in Boston Medical Center, which I guess makes sense because people are traveling more to like other parts of the city. So anyway, okay, so the results, Okay, so I ended up converting their responses into numbers so that, I could get averages. And this is kind of high level view of the responses that I got. This includes everybody that responded to the survey. So in the pink, we have perceptions of safety during the day. And here, like at 5 means they felt very safe. And then 1 means they did not feel safe at all. So again, pink is during the day and then purple is during the night. So you can see there's definitely a drop. And this is the most important graph of the whole thing. So I'll break it down. In the left, we have, of course, daytime, and then left, oh my God, sorry, I get my right and left mixed up. Okay, we have daytime, nighttime. And in the daytime, it turns out that people who identify as a woman actually feel slightly safer than those who don't. But then in the nighttime, we see that perceptions of safety drop for both groups. And the key thing here is that the drop is greater for people who identify as women than those who don't. So we see a drop for both groups with a greater drop for people who identify as women. Yeah, that's just saying what I just said. And okay, so that was just the survey data. So now I combined it with data about amenities. Wanted to see, if there was a relationship. So, okay, this is for the daytime for both groups. And these are the stops where they said they felt the safest. So we have bus stop 67, relatively close to the Harvard campus. That square in the corner is the Harvard yard. And then we have bus stop 74. So that's, really close to the MIT campus. And I do apologize. Here it shows that it only has a shelter and a bike lane, but it does also have a light post and a trash can. And that's something that I just realized this morning as I was going through this. And I went back to the PADI data set and it was also missing there. So I'm going to be reaching out to them so that we can all have the correct information. So I do apologize for that. I just noticed that. Okay, and then now it's the safe. Now we see where people feel the safest during the night, and so this for women, it's like where they feel the safest night does have a lot of amenities, and it's also important to know that stop is right between Central Square and the MIT campus. So it gets a lot of foot traffic. I think that's very important to note. And then for folks who do not identify as women, where they feel the safest is that same one from before, the one that's close to the Harvard campus. And if you've ever been there, it's a very like cozy bus stop. There's like foot traffic, but like there's not a lot of like there's cars, but like I don't know, it feels like quieter. So I personally like it. Okay, so now we're moving on to where do people feel the least safe during the daytime, and that for people who identify as women, that bus stop is in Boston. So I'm going to go into depth a little bit more about this, but it turns out that both people who identify as women and don't have the same one. And this is what it looks like. It's right next to a 7-Eleven, which, means like it's next to a storefront, which I would think would be a plus, but in this case, it's not. So I thought that was very curious. And I think this is where I would have liked to have the opportunity to do interviews and like talk to people and really find out what's going on. Because yeah, it has, I don't know if you can't really tell, but further down, there's like 2 benches and like, it has a very a sidewalk in great condition, and like there's lights because of the store. So anyway, I think these kinds of things need to be paired up with interviews. Now during, let's see, sorry, now I got lost. Okay, sorry. Okay, so the same thing, but where do people feel the least safe during the night? So again, all of these are in Boston. And okay, so this is where so both 58 and 57, as you can tell, are very close to each other. These are on the same block. They're right next to the Boston Medical Center. And I don't know if you've ever walked that area, but there's a lot of there's a lot of people there who I would need to talk to verify, but I believe perhaps they may be experiencing homelessness or, you know, just going through a rough time in their lives. So I did come across a lot of people like that. And yeah, I mean, if you were to just look at the amenities, you might be tempted to say like, oh yeah, there's a shelter, there's lights, there's a bike lane, people should be feeling safe here. But I think that's only the physical infrastructure, and we also need to be looking at more like, I guess, the social infrastructure of things, and how like the environment of these bus stops. Okay, so that was 58 and 57. And then bus stop number 6, which also scored the lowest. That one is very kind of isolated. There's not, like, it has a lot of amenities, but like it's kind of isolated. And I'll go more into detail in a second. But anyway, here's the map of the like Boston Medical Center. This is where like 57 and 58 are. And oh, here you can see there's the homeless services intake place. So I don't know. I think this is also indicative of how, you know, transportation interconnects with so many other things, so many other social issues, and we need to be collaborating with other departments as well to, you know, deliver an experience that, you know, people like a better experience for everybody. This is what one of the bus stops looks like that's near the medical center. If you were to just look at this, like, to me, it looks great, but it scored as one of the lowest. Okay, so this is, okay, there's a lot going on here, and I apologize if I'm going too fast. I just do have a lot to cover because I feel like this is a great opportunity to be able to talk to y'all. So anyway, I'll try to break this one down. Right here, we are looking at the just the scores for people who identify as women. And then we're looking at them at their scores for the daytime and for the nighttime. And we're looking at the differences in the averages, like in the black, like on the right edge, you'll see there's numbers like in the black lines. So that's the differences. That's how much their feelings of safety drop in the daytime to nighttime. And so let me see. The one with the greatest drop is bus stop number 6. And let me see if that's near. Yeah, so this is what it looks like. There was trash when I went there, and I went there a couple of times. So, and I don't know how often these bus stops get cleaned. So yeah, that's something to consider. And then if you look at the Google view, you can still see the pile of trash there. So I don't know what's going on. We need to, I don't know, somebody needs to look at the schedule. But okay, again, if you look at it, I mean, it has trees, it has a shelter, it has like a place to sit, it has a sidewalk, but it's still a bit more nuanced than that. Like if you look at the aerial view, it's literally surrounded by parking lots. There's no, like, there's just nothing. Even during the daytime, I felt kind of weird walking there because there was hardly anybody else walking. I was kind of alone. So again, amenities can only go so far. You can have all the trees in the world, but if there's hardly anybody else around, or like if you feel like something could happen to you and nobody would be around to help you, I mean, that's pretty scary. So yeah, I think there's a limit to how much amenities can do. We also need to look at other things, and a lot of this ties into land use as well. I mean, yeah, these are just parking lots. So how do we get more, like activate the space more? And this is just another view of it. Okay, did it go? Okay, we're almost done with the results portion. So this is just another way to look at it. These are, this is the same thing that we just saw, but for people who don't identify as women. So for these averages, I forgot to mention that, you know, not every bus stop had, like some of them only had one response. So I didn't want to use them at, like, for, you know, calculating averages. So I only used bus stops where I at least got 3 or more responses. So for the people who don't identify as women, there were less stops where 3 or more people responded to the survey, if that makes sense. So here, the one where they felt, you know, like a greater difference in the daytime versus nighttime was stop 57. And their difference was only of like 1 point. Whereas for women, the greatest difference, where was it? Was 1.67. So again, women are experiencing a higher drop. Yeah, okay. So what did I learn? So I think accessibility is fluid. And what do I mean by that? I think, you know, going back to the PADI data set, which aim to get a better sense of how accessible bus stops are, they only focus on physical infrastructure. So I think we need to be looking at, I don't know what I'm referring to as social infrastructure, but perhaps there's a better phrase for it. But yeah, just kind of like how people feel at these stops, because obviously it's not the same in the daytime versus the nighttime for either group. So yeah, I think it varies by time of day and then even time of year. Obviously in Boston, like it snows, and yeah, this isn't accessible. Sometimes the bus stops are not accessible, even though they have so many amenities, but because there's snow, they're not accessible. So I think accessibility is fluid, and I think we should be, you know, quantifying this in the accessibility scores that we are giving to transit stops. So yeah, more nuance is definitely needed, I think. Okay, so what makes a high quality bus stop? Yes, the traditional amenities, lights, benches, trees, shelters, all of that stuff is great. But again, also this needs to be paired with social amenities, like how much, you know, we could use like foot traffic as a proxy, measuring like getting pedestrian counts, getting bike counts, and seeing how they differ by day and night. And then just the ambiance, which I think we are only gonna, you know, get a better sense of if we start talking to people. Yeah, just kind of the general activity of the city. And a lot of these, you know, go back to land use, which, you know, can be very political. So it gets tricky. But I think it's important, obviously, because it is having an effect on how people experience transit in the Boston area. So for future research, I would say definitely pair up the quantitative with the qualitative, do more interviews, and then also do an overlay of land use data to get a better sense of like, yeah, to just make a stronger case of why we need to, you know, like have less parking lots near the bus stops, or, you know, that's a whole another project in itself. So yeah, looking more at land use data. And then also I would expand the project. I would look at other routes, maybe routes that have a lot of outdoor dining, so a lot of activation of the streets, and perhaps a lot more night activity, and then doing the same study during the winter time. Because again, I only did this in the summer, so it'd be interesting to see how the responses vary in the winter time, where it gets dark at 5 o'clock in the evening, sometimes even like 4:45, and it's dark, but yet maybe people are still like commuting, or there's still a lot of activity. So that could help differentiate between like, are people just not comfortable at night because it's dark, or because there's less people outside? Yeah, and then even just this one, the last one's just kind of for fun, documenting the kinds of lights, because there's different types. There's yellow, white, or like, what if we made them like a color, like a pink or a violet? Like, I don't know, that one's just for fun, but lots to research there. But okay, so now going on to best practices, I'm gonna focus on something local, and then also go deeper into the LA studies that I mentioned before. So I just wanted to give a huge shout out to this initiative, Gender and Mobility Initiative, that Livable Streets is heading up. So yeah, this is one of the only few that I know of in the Boston area, which is crazy to me. But yeah, they've been doing work on Columbia Road and Tremont Street and like other parts of Boston. So very local. And they've even been putting out these kind of flyers, which show a lot more information from the research that they've been doing. I know they did a survey as well, but I'm not sure if they did interviews. So, but definitely reaching out to them, that could be, I feel like there's great potential for partnerships there. Okay, so now going into LA, where I feel honestly there's a lot of this gender research plus transit is happening. So they have done 2 studies. One was done by the Department of Transportation called Changing Lanes, and then the other one was by LA Metro, Understanding How Women Travel. So this is Changing Lanes, very recent, both are very recent. This one was in 2021, and then the other one was in 2019. So yeah, super, super new. Yeah, and Understanding How Women Travel was the first one in LA Metro's history, where they the first time where they dedicated, so much effort into understanding the experiences of what is, I don't know, like half or maybe more of their ridership. So this was great to see. And I just wanted to include this quote here because ultimately this is serious. It says the gender data gap isn't just about silence. These silences, these gaps have consequences. They impact women's lives every day. If you don't feel comfortable going outside past a certain time, that means your city is not accessible to you. That means after a certain time, if you don't have a car, you don't have access to your city. And yeah, that's a massive issue. Okay, so I will go on to explain kind of do a quick overview of the methods, and then go on to their recommendations. And then at the very end, I will give my own recommendations. So yeah, the LA Metro one did survey, focus groups, participant observation. They did this thing where like ethnographic studies where they had volunteers to sit at bus stops or train stops and document the behavior of people, which I think is fascinating. And then they also did workshops and pop-ups. And something that they also included was this thing called mobility of care. This is research headed up by Inés Sánchez Madriaga. She works in Spain, and what she did, and which I'm hoping more people begin to do, is she looked at the categories of the surveys that are normally done by transit agencies or anybody trying to understand travel patterns. And she saw that there was data missing. There was a category that was missing because it was getting lost in the typical categories, if that makes sense. So for example, shopping. A lot of people shop for others, shop for their children, shop for their parents, or they escort their children to school, or again, their parents or some other family member, or they conduct visits to go check up on maybe somebody who is sick in their family, or, you know, like all of these activities have to do with care, with caring for other people. And they were not visible in the way that, in the questions that were being asked. So she proposed adding it and having it be its own category so that data became visible. You know, we could start quantifying it and then begin to, you know, address it. So mobility of care, I would highly encourage everybody to explore this, like, and then also like time use surveys, you know, yeah, how people use their time. Okay, so that was the Metro one. And then now moving on to changing lanes, the one done by LA Department of Transportation. Theirs was, I would say, a lot more robust. They did, yes, like they did similar things as the other one, but they also had additional things, like they partnered up with community members, like community groups, throughout like all the phases of the project. So, you know, how, like through like what questions to include in the survey, and like in spreading the survey and then analyzing the results. So there was a lot of collaboration, not just, it wasn't like the Department of Transportation came up with a strategy and then got feedback. It was like, no, they collaborated on like everything, which I think it's amazing. And I think maybe we could do that more in the Boston region. So anyway, they had that, and then also working groups. Okay, so the big takeaway from the Metro study was creating a gender action plan. And doesn't that just sound like exciting? Like gender action plan, like, I don't know, that to me has like this sounding thing. Anyway, so they had, you know, like focusing on staffing, fare policies, station and stop design, and then service provided by time of day. So like looking at frequencies, and then any future investments. And then the changing lanes one, they had, their takeaways were a bit different. I don't know how to explain it, but I would encourage everybody to read. If you don't have to read the whole study, just look at the takeaways, because they did a lot of work on it, and they had a lot of actionable items. So I'd encourage everybody to look at that one. But one of them was having key commitments. And these were it, you know, focusing on the participatory process. So again, co-creating, partnering with groups, and cross-sector integration, resource community partnerships, and sustained investment, which I think is great. Investing in these kinds of things, you know, actually having it be lines in the budget. Yeah, so that was one. And then also equitable delivery, and then knowledge building. And yeah, sorry, I don't want to read through all of that. That's a lot, but anyway, okay. So another takeaway was foundational steps. And the way they broke this down is by collecting data. So not all data has like a gender question. So, you know, taking stock of what's available. So yeah, and then collecting, like to find the gaps, and then collect more data to fill in those gaps. And then convening representatives. So again, lots of collaboration, which I think like things like this transit group are excellent at. So yeah, sorry, I forgot to add this. For the collect data part, I would just add like looking at existing initiative, like similar initiatives. Mobilizing Justice is one. It's very new and it's going on in Canada. They got this massive grant for universities and municipalities to work together to address, you know, justice issues in regards to transportation. So they're working on how to standardize metrics and different practices, and they're doing this massive survey across the whole country on this. So anyway, I'll explain more on that later, but something to keep in mind. And then they also say like bicycle and pedestrian counts, which I think I mentioned before. And then, okay, sorry, so now we're on track. Convening representatives. I would just add the Chamber of Commerce on this because, yeah, like I think it's important to look at like what businesses are around transit agencies or transit stops, and because, you know, obviously that dictates how much activity there is. And then they had like create participatory process, develop gender racial equity-based project like framework, and establishing new design and service standards and guidelines. Like I said, very robust, like very helpful. They've done a lot of work on this. And then to that last one, I'd just add like nearby destinations, restaurants, shops, hospitals. Okay, sorry, I hope all of this is making sense. And then finally, their last takeaway was implementation strategies. And this is where they go super in depth. So I'm not gonna mention all of them. I'm just gonna give you the ones that I would most recommend. But again, I'd encourage everybody to look at this if you're interested, because it really goes into detail about like how to actually do this. Okay, so now moving on to Grecia's suggestions. In an ideal world, these are the short-term suggestions. Okay, with regards to data, I would really just look at all the data that's available and see which one, like how much of it can be segregated by gender. And then I would start looking into creating a survey for your municipality that includes things like gender, disability, and then use of time that I had talked about before. And then just in regards to safety, I would like just be more specific. Like, where do you feel unsafe? Is it walking to the stop, or is it just waiting, or is it riding the bus? Because it's one thing to ask, do you feel unsafe, like using transit at night? But like, which part of it? There's multiples. So once we break it down more, I think it'll make it easier to target those things and work on them. And then lastly, pairing the quantitative and with the qualitative. So yes, looking at the numbers, but then also, you know, having more conversations with people and engaging them more, which is, yeah, participatory based research. And I really want to highlight this. This is something that a friend told me, and it has really stuck. Oftentimes we hear, oh, this project is data-driven. This is like a data-driven initiative, but we don't often have the data that we actually need. So if that's what we're using to drive a whole project, then that can lead to issues. So I prefer the term data informed, which kind of keeps open the door of like, there's always more to learn. And the data that we currently have is only serving to inform us, but the process is much bigger. Like, we need to just constantly be iterating and not just think that the data that we currently have is enough, if that makes sense. Okay, and okay. Another recommendation is staff. So creating a paid board. LA Metro has a Women's and Girls Governing Council, and they help, like, they're the ones that spearhead the whole study that they did. So yeah, they could advise on pilots or give input on like future iterations. And then they could help with the creation of something like the Gender Action Plan. And then another recommendation, this one's from the LA DOT study, is create a responsibility matrix, which I had never seen this before, but it sounds so helpful. You literally list out all your goals and then who is responsible for them. Like, I had seen versions of this, but I don't know, I think the way they did it, maybe it's the colors, I don't know, but I think the way they did it is really nice. So yeah, another thing is offer options. look into bicycle lending libraries. I think this is a fantastic idea. I think sometimes people are hesitant to purchase a certain kind of bike because they don't know which kind to offer. And then especially now that, you know, more people are getting interested in things like e-bikes, having the ability to rent one out for free for like a day or like a week could really, you know, like, wouldn't that be awesome if you could try it out and see for yourself, like, okay, how is this actually going to fit into my daily life? So anyway, that's one thing. And then build understanding. So this is kind of a big one, actually. I would, if I could control everything, I would have staff try out the different bus and train routes that they actually work on. Literally like ride them at various times of the day, like different times of the year, like really get a sense of, really understand them, and then try them out using, like, with a stroller, with a grocery cart, without a grocery cart, even if it's possible, like with a wheelchair, without a smartphone. Like, try to think of as many scenarios, like, to really put yourself in other people's shoes. And that's not a replacement at all for actually talking to people, but I think it could be helpful. I think it makes intuitive sense. And another option would be to shadow riders. This is something that was done and talked about in the Go Boston 2030. So there's already precedent for this. Staff was paired up with writers and they would, you know, talk and get to really understand their experience better. And lastly on this is, yeah, explore what local orgs are doing. I mentioned livable streets. And then also, I don't know, talk to the women in your own life. And yeah, help. Anyway, yeah, sorry, Sandy just said I need to wrap up. So I'm about like literally 30 seconds. So long-term solutions. Okay, in the long term, I mentioned mobilizing justice. Look into this, please look into this. I think you'll be hearing more about this soon. Doing a regional mobility census, how amazing would that be? Really would help establish a baseline going forward. And then Somerville already does like a happiness survey. So I don't know, maybe see how they've been doing that. And then for staff, hire more people who reflect the makeup of your municipality. This was not talked about in either of the surveys. I think it's important. And lastly, daycares. Have daycares near transit stops, or have daycares in your agency. This was done in Bolivia. They managed to do this in Bolivia. Like, that's incredible. And then, yeah, gender action plan, and maybe hire a night mayor. There's a Boston Globe article on this. And then another thing, universal transit pass. LA is doing this as well. So yeah, look into this as well. It's the like universal basic mobility approach, which amazing. And then budget, have all of this be line items in your budget. Okay, and then planning land use, less parking, more housing basically. But okay, this last thing, design versus user experience. Focus on how does it feel to take transit. Again, physical infrastructure has its limitations. We need to really be asking people how they feel actually, which I know is messy, but it's pretty important. Okay, and that is it. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Gracie. That was great. I think given that it is 5 until 6, I would ask folks to just kind of wrap any questions you have for Gracie into our Q&A, or our public comment, which is what we're going to turn to next. But that was a fantastic presentation. And Gracie, if you could put your email in the chat also so that folks can know where to find you, that would be great. Stella, if we could go to the next slide. So we've shared a lot of information today. We also want to make sure we provide folks with an opportunity to ask questions of our keynote speaker, Gracia, or of anybody else. If you want to share anything else related to the topics that have been brought up today, now's your chance. You can share in the chat or raise your hand and we'll call on you. Either way, I'm just going to try and get through this in the next few minutes. All right, well, I think you all know where to follow up with our presenters, and we'll also be sending out all of this information by email after the meeting. So we can go on to closing and next steps. One more slide. Thank you. So before we wrap up, I do want to thank everybody who has presented here today and all of my various colleagues who have supported us in pulling off this meeting. I do want to mention what we're going to be doing next. We're going to continue to hold these large working group meetings roughly quarterly. You can expect one in May or so. But between now and then, we'll also be holding more of the series of coffee chats that we've really been having a great time with. These are informal virtual events centered on a particular theme or topic, capped at 30 attendees or so, so they're intimate. We'll be announcing more soon, but for now, I'm really happy to be able to announce the following events. There's going to be a coffee chat on travel demand management, which you already heard about next week. A little bit after that, we're going to have one on transit fleet electrification with Zach Agush from the Rhode Island Public Transit Authority. And then there will be one on human services transportation with Vera Curian from the Executive Office of Health and Human Services in March. I put links to the registration in the chat, and you are more than welcome. Please sign up for those. Please also keep an eye out for future announcements, because we do have others coming down the pike as well. We'll be sending out a post meeting email. So if we could go to the next slide, that's going to include information about the topics discussed today, including all the links that we shared in the chat, because I know there were a lot. There's going to be a post-event survey so that you can let us know your thoughts on this meeting and also other transit working group events. And I'm going to put a link to that in the chat. One more link, but you'll also get this by email. And then there'll also be a link to the recording of the meeting on YouTube. And then we could go to one more slide. Finally, if anybody has questions, ideas, thoughts you'd like to share, my contact information is on the slide. You can reach me at sjohnston@ctps.org or 857-702-3710 during business hours. With that, unless anybody has an urgent anything, any last items that they would like to bring up, I am very happy to say good night and thank you again to everybody. This has been a great meeting and conversation as always.